The afternoon sun, fractured by the towering glass facade of the Marina Palace, cast geometric patterns across the polished marble floor. Dust motes danced in the golden light, a silent ballet against the backdrop of opulent indifference. Anna Barrett, her hands clasped loosely before her, felt the cool smoothness of the marble through the thin fabric of her gloves. She took a slow, measured breath, the faint scent of sea salt and chlorine mingling with the cloying sweetness of some exotic floral arrangement. This wasn't her world. The hushed whispers, the clicking of designer heels, the subtle appraisals disguised as casual glances, it was a language she hadn't bothered to learn. Andrew had insisted she meet him here. Something about signing papers, something important related to her foundation. He'd said he'd be delayed in a meeting, but to wait for him in the lobby. Now, standing beneath the crystal chandelier that likely cost more than her entire childhood home, Anna felt a familiar pang of unease. He should have known better than to ask me to come here, she thought, the thought a small, bitter seed in the fertile ground of her anxiety. The receptionist, a woman whose name tag read Victoria, surveyed Anna with an air of thinly veiled disdain. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently against the gleaming surface of the mahogany desk. Victoria's smile, if it could be called that, didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a smile reserved for those deemed worthy, a smile that Anna clearly hadn't earned. "Can I help you?" Victoria asked, the question laced with an unspoken, or should I call security? "I'm waiting for my husband, Andrew Barrett," Anna replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She resisted the urge to fidget, to smooth down the simple cotton dress that felt suddenly, acutely inadequate. "To say the name, Anna. It's the only currency they understand here." Victoria's expression flickered, a subtle shift from dismissal to cautious appraisal. The name, it seemed, held some weight. Before Victoria could respond, a voice, dripping with condescension, cut through the hushed murmur of the lobby. "Darling, I think you've confused this with the budget hotels in town." Anna turned to see a woman, draped in what looked like liquid gold, approaching her. Her lips, painted a shade of scarlet that screamed expensive, curled into a sneer. This was Catherine Wellington, a name Anna recognized from society pages, synonymous with extravagant galas and even more extravagant scandals. Catherine's eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over Anna's modest attire, lingering on her worn handbag. They see the clothes, not the person, Anna thought, a familiar weariness settling over her. It wasn't the first time she'd faced this kind of judgment, and it wouldn't be the last. The sting, however, never quite faded. "No," Anna replied, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm his wife. He asked me to—" Catherine let out a laugh that sounded like wind chimes made of ice. "His wife? Oh, this is priceless. Andrew's taste has certainly deteriorated." She turned to Victoria, her eyes gleaming with malicious amusement. "You really should be more discerning about who you let loiter in the lobby, darling. It reflects poorly on the establishment." Victoria, caught between the weight of Andrew's name and Catherine's social standing, floundered. A thin sheen of sweat appeared on her forehead. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could utter a word, the double doors of the resort swung open. The lobby fell silent. Andrew Barrett strode in, his presence filling the space like a storm gathering force. His face, usually composed and impassive, was a mask of barely controlled fury. His eyes, dark and intense, scanned the lobby, landing on Anna. In that instant, the anger seemed to soften, replaced by a look of concern, relief. It was a fleeting expression, gone as quickly as it appeared. He crossed the lobby in a few long strides, the expensive fabric of his suit rustling with suppressed energy. He stopped before Anna, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her simple dress, the slight slump of her shoulders, the quiet dignity in her eyes. He didn't touch her, but the air between them crackled with an unspoken connection. "Anna," he said, his voice low and resonant. The name, spoken by him, sounded different, imbued with a weight and warmth it lacked when uttered by the others. He turned to Victoria, his voice hardening. "Is there a problem?" Victoria stammered, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. "Mr. Barrett, there seemed to be some confusion." Andrew cut her off, his voice laced with steel. "Confusion? My wife is waiting for me, as I requested. Is that confusing?" He then turned to Catherine, his gaze cold and unforgiving. "And you, Ms. Wellington," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I believe my wife's attire is none of your concern." He didn't raise his voice, yet the power radiating from him silenced the entire lobby. The air thickened with tension. Richard Maxwell, the resort owner, emerged from his office, his face pale. He recognized the storm brewing in Andrew's eyes, the kind that could dismantle empires with a single glance. Andrew took Anna's hand, his touch firm and reassuring. "Come, Anna," he said, his voice softening as he addressed her. "We have business to discuss." He led her towards the elevators, ignoring the stunned silence that followed them. A security guard, James, who had been summoned earlier by Victoria to escort Anna out, stood frozen, his hand hovering near the radio at his hip. He watched them go, a flicker of something akin to shame crossing his face. He judged her, too, he thought, the realization a bitter pill to swallow. He looked down at his uniform, the symbol of authority suddenly feeling heavy, a burden rather than a badge of honor. As the elevator doors closed, separating Anna and Andrew from the stunned onlookers, the whispers started again, this time tinged with awe and a healthy dose of fear. The balance of power had shifted, subtly but irrevocably, and in the hushed opulence of the Marina Palace, a new understanding dawned. Clothes didn't make the woman, and some women, dressed in the simplest of attire, held more power than they ever cared to reveal. The polished marble floor reflected the opulent chandeliers, casting a shimmering, almost mocking light on Anna's simple dress. Each tick of the grand lobby clock seemed to amplify the silence that had fallen, a silence thick with unspoken judgment. Victoria, her perfectly coiffed hair gleaming under the artificial light, tapped a manicured nail against her sleek tablet. A thin smile played on her lips, the kind reserved for situations where she held all the cards. Inside, a cold satisfaction bloomed. She'd handled countless difficult guests, each one a minor disruption in the carefully curated world of the Marina Palace. This woman, this imposter, was merely another blip, a fleeting moment of amusement for the elite clientele. "I'm afraid I must insist," Victoria said, her voice smooth as silk but with a steel undercurrent. "Security will escort you out." Her eyes flicked dismissively over Anna's worn handbag, a silent confirmation of her initial assessment. Anna felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The air, heavy with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, suddenly felt suffocating. She gripped her handbag tighter, the worn leather a small comfort in the face of overwhelming hostility. He wouldn't want this, she thought, her heart clenching. Andrew despised this kind of ostentation, this casual cruelty masquerading as sophistication. "Please," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Just call Andrew. Andrew Barrett. He's expecting me." The words felt small, lost in the cavernous space of the lobby. Victoria's smile widened, a predatory glint in her eyes. The desperation in Anna's voice was music to her ears. "We can't have people walking and claiming to be whoever they please," she retorted, her tone dripping with condescension. She signaled to two uniformed security guards who approached, their expressions impassive. This was routine. Another wannabe clinging to a fabricated connection to wealth and power. The movement drew the attention of Catherine Wellington, draped in a designer gown that shimmered like liquid gold. She observed the scene with a detached amusement, her eyes narrowed in assessment. This little drama was a welcome distraction from the tedium of her afternoon. "She's one of those gold diggers we keep reading about," she commented to her companion, her voice laced with disdain. A ripple of laughter followed, whispers weaving through the lobby like insidious tendrils. Anna felt her cheeks burn, the humiliation searing through her. The laughter echoed in her ears, each chuckle a tiny shard of glass piercing her composure. She had anticipated some resistance, some skepticism perhaps, but this blatant mockery was a blow she hadn't foreseen. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag, her knuckles white. Just breathe, she told herself. Andrew will be here soon. This whole charade would be over soon. She just needed to hold on. The security guards loomed over her, their presence a physical manifestation of her powerlessness. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the harsh judgment in the eyes of the onlookers. He extended a hand towards her arm, a gesture that was both polite and firm. He didn't want to do this. She could see it in the slight furrow of his brow, the almost imperceptible hesitation in his movement. He was just following orders, trapped in the same system of appearances as she was. Just as his fingers brushed against her sleeve, a voice cut through the tense atmosphere, a voice that commanded attention. "What is the meaning of this?" The voice was low, laced with controlled fury. It resonated through the lobby, silencing the whispers and laughter. Every head turned towards the entrance. Andrew Barrett stood framed in the doorway, his presence radiating power and authority. His tailored suit, the subtle glint of his watch, the unwavering intensity in his eyes, every detail screamed wealth and influence. But it was the barely controlled rage in his expression that held everyone captive. He scanned the scene, his gaze lingering on Anna, a flicker of concern softening the hard lines of his face. Then, his eyes swept over Victoria, Catherine, and the rest of the onlookers, his expression hardening once more. A wave of unease rippled through the lobby. Richard Maxwell, the resort owner, materialized beside Victoria, his face pale. He recognized the storm brewing in Andrew's eyes, the kind of storm that could dismantle empires. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some explanation, some appeasement, but the words caught in his throat. Victoria, her composure finally cracking, stammered, "Mr. Barrett, we didn't know." Andrew cut her off with a wave of his hand. He strode towards Anna, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. He reached her side, his hand gently cupping her elbow. The touch was a silent reassurance, a public declaration of their connection. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, a mixture of anger and concern in their depths. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, only for her ears. Anna nodded, a lump forming in her throat. The relief that washed over her was so profound it almost brought her to her knees. She wanted to tell him everything, to pour out the humiliation and fear she had endured, but the words wouldn't come. All she could manage was a shaky breath, a silent acknowledgement of his presence, his protection. The air in the lobby crackled with tension. The shift in power was palpable. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a stunned silence. The onlookers, moments ago so eager to judge and condemn, now averted their gazes, their faces masks of apprehension. The hunter had become the hunted. The ornate chandelier, a cascade of crystal tears, shimmered above, casting fractured light onto the polished marble floor. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, hung heavy with a sudden, electric tension. Anna, her simple dress a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings, felt the security guard's grip tighten on her arm. A strange calm descended upon her. She had anticipated this, the casual cruelty of those who judged worth by the cut of a dress, the brand of a handbag. It was a familiar script, one she'd read many times before. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible sigh. This was merely a stage, and she a player. The real drama was yet to unfold. Then, a voice, deep and resonant, cut through the strained silence. "Take your hands off my wife." The words, though quiet, reverberated through the lobby, each syllable laced with steel. Anna's head snapped up, her gaze meeting Andrew's across the expanse of the room. He stood there, a figure of quiet power, his tailored suit a dark silhouette against the bright backdrop of the entrance. His face, normally etched with the gentle lines of a thoughtful man, was now a mask of controlled fury. The transformation was subtle, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye. But Anna knew him, knew the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes narrowed, the barely contained storm brewing beneath the surface. James, the security guard, hesitated, his fingers loosening their grip on Anna's arm. He hadn't expected this. No one had. His mind raced, grappling with the sudden shift in atmosphere. This woman, this plainly dressed woman, was married to Andrew Barrett? The Andrew Barrett? His stomach lurched. He'd seen Barrett's name on the resort's VIP list, a name whispered with respect, even fear. He stammered, "Sir, we didn't." Victoria, her carefully constructed composure crumbling, stepped forward, her smile brittle. "Mr. Barrett, we had no idea this woman was—" "Let's talk about standards, Victoria," Andrew interrupted, his voice still low, but carrying an undeniable weight. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. The sheer force of his presence commanded attention. He crossed the remaining distance to Anna, his movements measured, deliberate. The faintest hint of sandalwood and leather, his familiar scent, reached Anna, a silent reassurance amidst the chaos. He placed a hand on her arm, his touch a gentle contrast to the guard's rough grasp. He turned to James, his gaze sharp. "You may leave us." James, his face flushed with shame, mumbled an apology and quickly retreated, melting back into the ornate background. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, the silent judgment of his colleagues, the palpable fear of Richard Maxwell, the resort owner, hovering nearby. He'd made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and now he was caught in the undertow. Victoria, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, struggled to regain control of the situation. She had meticulously cultivated an image of unflappable competence, and this incident was a crack in her carefully constructed facade. Her mind raced, searching for an explanation, a justification, anything to salvage the situation. "Mr. Barrett, I assure you, this was a misunderstanding. We simply have protocols." Andrew's gaze, cold and unwavering, silenced her. He didn't offer excuses, didn't engage in petty arguments. He simply looked at her, and in that look, Victoria saw the full extent of her misjudgment. He didn't see her, the head receptionist, the gatekeeper of this exclusive world. He saw through her, through the carefully crafted image, to the petty, insecure woman beneath. Catherine Wellington, watching from the sidelines, felt a shiver of unease crawl up her spine. She had enjoyed the spectacle, the humiliation of this plainly dressed woman. She had relished the feeling of superiority, the smug satisfaction of belonging to this rarefied world. Now, however, the air had shifted, the balance of power subtly, irrevocably altered. She watched Andrew Barrett, this man of quiet power and a flicker of fear, something she hadn't felt in years, touched her heart. Andrew turned to Anna, his expression softening. He gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch a silent apology for the ordeal she had endured. "Are you all right?" he murmured, his voice low and tender, a stark contrast to the icy tone he had used moments before. Anna met his gaze, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I'm fine, Andrew," she replied, her voice calm and steady. She knew the performance was far from over. This was merely the opening act. Richard Maxwell, the resort owner, approached, his face a mask of anxious concern. He had witnessed the entire scene from a distance, his heart sinking with every word that Andrew Barrett uttered. He knew the implications, the potential damage to the resort's reputation. This wasn't just any guest. This was Andrew Barrett, a man whose influence extended far beyond the gilded walls of the Marina Palace. "Mr. Barrett," he began, his voice laced with forced cordiality, "I am so sorry for this unfortunate incident. Please, allow me to offer you our sincerest apologies. We will, of course, be conducting a thorough investigation into this matter." Andrew's gaze shifted to Maxwell, his eyes like chips of ice. "I'm sure you will," he replied, his voice devoid of warmth. He turned back to Anna, his hand still resting protectively on her arm. "Come, let's go somewhere more civilized." He led her away, leaving behind a stunned silence in their wake. The air, still thick with the scent of lilies, now carried a different fragrance, the bitter tang of regret. The silence stretched, taut and brittle, in the opulent lobby of the Marina Palace. Victoria Matthews, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack, felt a prickle of unease. The man Andrew Barrett radiated a quiet power that belied his impeccably tailored suit. His eyes, dark and intense, held a chilling stillness that made her heart pound against her ribs. He had called her darling, the same saccharine term she used to dismiss the woman beside him. But in his voice, it was a weapon. He's dangerous, she thought, the realization a cold drop of water sliding down her spine. I made a terrible mistake. The air, thick with the residue of tension, now hung heavy with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, a desperate attempt to mask the lingering stench of humiliation. The Marina Palace lobby, minutes ago a stage for casual cruelty, now buzzed with a different kind of energy. It wasn't the usual pre-dinner chatter, the clinking of champagne flutes, or the rustling of designer dresses. It was a stunned silence, broken only by the nervous clearing of throats and the hushed whispers that skittered like frightened mice across the marble floor. Victoria Matthews, her perfectly coiffed hair now slightly askew, stood frozen behind the reception desk. The elegant smile she usually wore was gone, replaced by a tight, strained expression that barely concealed the panic churning beneath the surface. Just moments ago, she'd held the reins of power in this opulent space, wielding her authority with the casual disdain of someone accustomed to deference. Now, she felt the weight of every judgmental glance, every whispered word, every dismissive gesture she'd ever inflicted on others. He knows, she thought, the words echoing in her mind like a death knell. He knows what I did, what I said. Andrew Barrett's gaze, cold and sharp as a winter wind, swept across the lobby, lingering for a fraction of a second on each face. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a scene, but his silence was more terrifying than any outburst. It was the silence of a predator assessing his prey. Catherine Wellington, usually radiating an air of self-assured superiority, now fidgeted with the diamond pendant hanging from her neck, a nervous tic she hadn't displayed since her debutante ball. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin an ashen gray. She could still feel the sting of Andrew's words, a public rebuke that had stripped her bare, exposing the shallowness she'd spent years carefully concealing. Shame, hot and suffocating, coiled in her stomach. She'd underestimated Anna Barrett, dismissed her as inconsequential, a nobody. Now, she realized with a sickening lurch that she was the one who was insignificant, a speck of dust in the face of Andrew Barrett's quiet fury. Richard Maxwell, the owner of the Marina Palace, stood near the entrance, his usually jovial face etched with anxiety. His eyes darted between Andrew and the small group of reporters who had gathered, their cameras flashing, capturing every nuance of the unfolding drama. He'd built his empire on catering to the whims of the wealthy elite, creating an oasis of exclusivity. But in one swift, devastating moment, Andrew Barrett had shattered that carefully constructed facade, exposing the ugliness that lurked beneath the veneer of sophistication. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones. The damage control would be monumental. James, the security guard who had earlier tried to escort Anna out, stood near the edge of the lobby, his head bowed. He'd been following orders, doing his job, but now he felt a profound sense of shame. He'd judged a book by its cover, and in doing so, he'd missed the true story. He looked at Anna, her simple dress now imbued with a different kind of elegance, the elegance of quiet strength and unwavering compassion. He felt a pang of regret, a wish he could rewind time, undo his actions. He couldn't. The only thing he could do was bear witness and hope for a chance to make amends. A hush fell over the lobby as Andrew Barrett stepped forward, his hand resting protectively on Anna's arm. He looked out at the assembled crowd, his gaze unwavering. "My wife wasn't dressed for your approval today," he announced, his voice resonating with quiet power. "She was dressed for the children she helps." Each word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Anna, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and sadness, squeezed his hand. She hadn't wanted this public display, this forced apology. But she knew it was necessary, not for her, but for the countless children whose lives she was trying to improve. Andrew continued, his voice gaining strength. Today, we celebrate the grand opening of the Barrett Children's Rehabilitation Center, a facility dedicated to providing world-class care to children in need. He paused, letting the words sink in. A project, he added, his voice laced with steel, that my wife has poured her heart and soul into, a project that some of you, his gaze swept across the faces of Victoria, Catherine, and Richard, deemed unworthy of your attention. The silence that followed was deafening. The reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching against their notepads like tiny insects. The cameras flashed, capturing the expressions of shock, shame, and dawning realization on the faces of the elite. Victoria Matthews felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The Barrett Children's Rehabilitation Center. She'd heard whispers of it, dismissed it as another one of Anna Barrett's pet projects. She hadn't realized the scope, the magnitude, the sheer impact of this undertaking. Catherine Wellington's diamond pendant felt like a lead weight around her neck. She'd spent her life chasing status, accumulating wealth, judging others based on superficial criteria. Now, in the face of Anna Barrett's quiet dignity and unwavering commitment to a cause greater than herself, she felt utterly hollow. Richard Maxwell felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The Marina Palace, his pride and joy, had become a symbol of prejudice and shallowness. He knew he had to act, and act quickly, to salvage not only his reputation but also his conscience. The whispers started again, this time laced with a different kind of awe, a grudging respect for the woman they had so readily dismissed. Anna Barrett, once invisible, now stood at the center of the room, bathed in the light of her own compassion. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Sunlight filtered through the vast, arched windows of the Marina Palace, now painted a different picture. The gleaming marble floors, once reflecting the sharp angles of designer heels and the haughty gazes of the elite, now bore the softer imprints of small, rubber-soled shoes. The air, once thick with the perfume of affluence and the unspoken tension of social hierarchy, now carried the faint, comforting scent of antiseptic and the gentle murmur of children's laughter. 1 month. 1 month had reshaped the very soul of this place. Victoria, her crisp uniform now subtly altered, devoid of the stiff formality it once held, watched a small boy carefully navigate the polished floor with a brightly colored walker. Her gaze, once sharp and assessing, now held a flicker of something akin to tenderness. The memory of that day, the day Mrs. Barrett arrived, remained a vivid, uncomfortable knot in her stomach. The shame, the swift, brutal dismantling of her carefully constructed world of appearances had left an indelible mark. But within that mark, a strange seed had been sown, a seed of humility. She'd spent the last month observing Mrs. Barrett, not with the previous disdain, but with a quiet, burgeoning respect. The woman's effortless grace, the genuine warmth in her interactions with the children, it was a power far greater than the fleeting authority Victoria had once clung to. Catherine Wellington, once a queen of this opulent domain, sat quietly on a plush sofa, a children's book open in her lap. Her perfectly manicured fingers traced the colorful illustrations, a stark contrast to the sharp, dismissive gestures she'd once employed. The humiliation of that day, the public stripping of her social armor, had initially burned like acid, but the slow, steady trickle of understanding that followed had been a painful, necessary cleansing. She'd witnessed firsthand the transformative power of Mrs. Barrett's compassion, the way it reached even the most hardened hearts, including her own. The book in her lap felt strangely heavy, a symbol of a world she was only beginning to understand, a world beyond the superficial glitter she'd once worshipped. James, the security guard, now stood by the newly installed play area, a small, hesitant smile playing on his lips. He watched the children, their faces alight with joy, their laughter echoing through the once sterile lobby. He remembered the weight of Mrs. Barrett's arm on his, the quiet dignity in her eyes as he'd escorted her out. That memory had haunted him, a constant reminder of his complicity in the charade of superiority that had permeated this place. Now, he found himself drawn to the children, their innocent energy a balm to the guilt he'd carried. He offered a small wave to a little girl with pigtails, and her shy smile in return felt like a small, precious absolution. The newly constructed wing of the Marina Palace, once a symbol of exclusive luxury, now housed the vibrant heart of the Barrett Children's Rehabilitation Center. Large, airy rooms filled with specialized equipment and brightly colored toys replaced the opulent suites. The sounds of therapy sessions, the gentle encouragement of therapists, mingled with the children's excited chatter. Anna Barrett walked through the halls, her simple dress a stark contrast to the gleaming surfaces around her. She paused by a window, watching a young boy take his first tentative steps with the aid of parallel bars. A faint smile touched her lips. The fight had been arduous, the resistance from the resort's management fierce. But Andrew, her husband, had stood by her, a silent, unwavering force against the tide of opposition. His initial rage, the controlled fury she'd witnessed that day, had transformed into a quiet determination to see her vision through. He hadn't uttered a word of reproach to those who'd wronged her. He hadn't needed to. The transformation of the Marina Palace was its own, eloquent statement. Anna entered her office, a small, unassuming space tucked away from the bustling activity of the center. She sat at her desk, the sunlight illuminating the papers spread before her. Grants, budgets, progress reports, the tangible evidence of the change she'd wrought. She closed her eyes for a moment, the echoes of the past month swirling in her mind. The disdain, the humiliation, the quiet strength she'd summoned to face it all. And then, the slow, gradual shift in the eyes of those who judged her, the dawning realization that true worth lay not in outward appearances, but in the depths of one's heart. She opened her eyes, her gaze falling on a framed photograph on her desk. Andrew, their hands intertwined, their smiles reflecting a shared understanding that transcended words. He'd understood her vision, her unwavering belief in the power of second chances, the inherent goodness she saw in every human being, even those who'd lost their way. The Marina Palace, once a monument to superficiality, now stood as a testament to the transformative power of empathy, a beacon of hope for those who needed it most. Sometimes, Anna thought, the greatest transformations occur not in grand gestures, but in the quiet whispers of changed hearts. The journey had been long, the battle hard fought, but the reward, the blossoming of hope within these walls, was worth more than all the riches in the world.